In this knife making video, Harry of Gough Cutlery will be showing us how to make a San Mai Chef Knife. Hi everyone, my name is Vince from the UK Blade Show. This video is sponsored by the following people. Please check out their links in the description. As a little thank you because they help us making knife making videos like this. This episode is very exciting because we'll get to see the blade being forged. He has some really pro tips on how to stop the carbon from exiting the blade using a cold forge, and also has this really cool pair of funky tongs that he uses so that the blade doesn't twist around while he's forging. So watch it all the way until the end. Now let's head off to Glastonbury to watch Harry forge his knife.
Hi, I'm Harry Gough. I run Gough Cutlery and Avalon Forgecraft. I make semi-mass-produced knives in small batches aimed towards high performance. My main target audience is professional chefs, and then I also make higher-end art piece knives for any enthusiasts that want a statement piece, a collector's piece, or just something to sort of take their work to the next level, something to make them feel nice in the kitchen, really. Well, obviously we'll light the forge and then draw out the tang. One of the reasons I'm going to use the cold forge is so that I can isolate the heat just in the tang, because when you're forging a San Mai, the carbon from the core wants to move into the jacket. If I can just heat the tang area, that stops any carbon migrating out of the blade. That's one factor of why we'll use the cold forge to start with, because we can keep the heat out of the blade area, and then switch straight to the power hammer because we want to draw it out as fast as possible to give the carbon as little time to migrate into the jacket. Basically, one of the big challenges of doing San Mai is that we want to forge it as fast as possible to keep as much carbon in the core. Or the other option is you can put shims of nickel into it between the carbon and the low carbon, but in this case we've just got stainless, high carbon and stainless, so carbon will want to move out into the jacket. So I'll get the forge lit and we'll get on with it. So yeah, like I say, first thing is to draw out the tang. I make these roughly 2 knives worth at once. So this has already had this knife drawn off the other side, and this should be enough for just a bit bigger than this, I think. This is a bit less than half the original billet. So this should make about a 210mm chef. Yeah, this looks good. Small amount of dry coal on top. I like to keep filling in the gaps, but then make sure there's still flames poking out, and now it's going to get really smoky. And that's that. We just wait a couple of minutes to get that proper good and flaming. I pretty much wait until all the wood has burnt away, and then you've got a nice fire going. Basically, flames will be coming all the way out the top. It'll be a good tall fire. I mean, you see how there's a little bit of flame starting to come out here? It'll just look like that, sort of all the way across. I could probably plunge the metal quite far in here and it would start to get hot now, but I like to let it get a bit more consistent, and I'm quite hesitant about plunging the steel all the way in, because the deeper you go in a cold forge, the hotter it gets, and knife steel wants to stay sort of below 1200 degrees roughly, otherwise you start to lose carbon out of it. It'll actually burn off into the atmosphere. So I let the top of the fire get nice and hot and just use the top of the fire so I can see the temperature, which if we were doing generic blacksmithing or especially wrought ironwork, you can be a little bit more brave with it because you don't need it to be hardenable at the end. So that's pretty much ready. Starting to see flames coming out the top. I'm just going to put that on there to preheat slowly for now. It'll probably be another 5 minutes before the fire is really ready to go, but might as well get some heat in the metal while we're waiting. So I'm going to start by laying the material I want for the tang over the corner. and make a little dip where the heel of the knife will be. That process is called isolation because we've isolated or chosen the material we want to make the tang out of. It should heat up fairly fast now that it's been up to temperature once. I'll draw the tang out to like a pre-form, so there's enough of a stub to hold it whilst forging, and then I'll go back and work on it again later as well, because as we forge the spine of the knife out, the tang is going to want to get a little bit thinner than it is at the moment. That's heat 2. Yeah, that was a good one. So the billet's a little bit thicker than I normally work with, so I've got a little bit more time than I'm used to, which is actually quite nice. So now it's basically down to the size I want in terms of squareness. I'm just going to taper the end out a little bit. And that's going to do for now. It's still very thick here, and you can see it's quite short. It's only about the length of my fingertip. So that's going to grow a lot, but we'll do that as we're starting to pull the bevels and the distal taper of the knife out. So we're ready to turn that around. Got something to hold on to whilst forging the bevels. Basically squeeze out the distal taper and the bevels. The only thing I've got to do before that is just knock this corner back in to start creating the tip, and then we'll start to pull it out in these two directions. So I'll start by just heating the corner on the back to push the tip in. At this stage, I'll just be going on the colour. It wants to be a fairly bright orange, maybe yellow, but not too much more than that. That's about perfect, where it's fairly bright orange, as I said. And then there's a fairly small forging window when I'm working on the blade. I'm not so fussed about the tang. If the metallurgy is a little bit funky in the tang, there's still easily enough metal there to support the rest of the blade, so I don't mind if I get a bit of funky grain going on in there. But obviously the blade, we want to be as careful as possible to keep it within a certain forging window. If you forge it too hot, you start to get grain growth, but also you can introduce some cracks. And if you forge it too cold, you can definitely introduce some cracks, because you're basically trying to spread the metal out while it doesn't want to move. Right, that'll do for my preform. Now I'm ready to move on to the power hammer. I'll start to heat the whole blade up instead of just individual parts. And this is where I really want to start trying to draw out the metal as quickly as possible. Get the blade mostly to shape in as few heats as possible. There are some slower forging sections, but I'll do them at a much lower heat to ideally try and have as little of the carbon migrate as possible. So I'll just run over and turn the phase converter and the power hammer on. This is Dunstan, patron saint of blacksmithing, also the local saint of Glastonbury, hence why we call him that. I like forging close to shape. I find forging a lot more enjoyable than grinding, and I just think it's a very useful and versatile skill, and it would be nice to have it honed down to a very fine degree. So these tongs are potentially interesting for the bladesmiths out there. These have got jaws that are both cupped, so they sit inside each other, which means you always get 3 points of contact with your material, which means you always get a really nice grip, much better than two flat jaws. So these are really nice for when you have to hold your material in that way that it wants to sort of rotate when you hit it, which is a big part of the problem. Obviously, ideally you'll use some tongs that just encompass the material all the way, but sometimes that's not available. So I'll be starting with these ones, and then once the tang gets too thin to hold with those, I'll have to switch to these ones here. So the end of the metal's starting to get hot. This is what I was talking about with being able to just heat up the tang area, and then we know we've not got any of the carbon migrating down here. So I'm going to start by drawing it out this way, making it both taller and longer. Takes Dunstan a little while to get warmed up in the morning. The way this works is there's a flywheel here, and on the other side there's a clutch, and so when you press this pedal, the two clutch plates are pulled together and that starts the flywheel turning. Well, he really is slow this morning. It hits considerably faster. So that's basically, it's cold grease. It just needs to wait for the friction to heat the grease up a little bit, and the head will swing a little bit faster. Oh, just rubbed a load of grease on my trousers. More of the same. Starting to get a little bit thinner here, and like I said, we're going to need to thin the tang out quite a lot still. I think it's time I put on some ear defenders.
I forgot mine, so actually, yeah. Good idea.
I do the tangs pretty much in the forge quite often because of, like I said, keeping the heat isolated. But now that we've done the tang, there's kind of no benefit to using the coal forge. It's just more effort to monitor the heat, really. Now that the tang's mostly done, I'll switch to the gas. It is nice to work with a real fire though as well. There's something about having a coal forge on that feels good, but having to keep moving your piece around and always check it, you need an assistant. So the reason I was switching between straight and angled there is because the tip is tall enough already and I just want that to get longer, whereas the back half of the blade I want to be making more height on the blade as well. So for those parts I'll forge diagonal to make it into length and height, and then for the tip I'll just be making it into length.
Thank you again for watching. If you want to watch more knife making videos, hit the like button and put the comment below, where in the world are you watching this from? Thank you and see you in the next video. Click it quick, otherwise the ad will start.